Thanks, guys, for coming. See some new faces, some returning faces, so that's always good. Um, Hopefully, we'll have a couple more people that had confirmed. I hope they're not sitting at Maroon Door, but I'm sure they'll kind of file in. So this month, super excited about. I'm actually, no offense, but happy to not be the one talking the whole time. We brought a great guest in, Jamie Oliver with Highlander Construction, to go over a lot of not only budgeting on the rehab side of things, but and I'll let Jamie get into his credentials a little bit. I don't want to butcher that, but he's going to go through really the whole process from like a holistic standpoint, from the evaluation phase, all the way through the budgeting and scope of work, kind of what you want to be thinking about as far as strategy goes with the property. Is it going to be a good flip? Are the numbers too tight? Going into it, does it make sense to make it a rental? Are you getting it at the right purchase price based on what it needs? What do you actually want to do to the property? Busting out walls is a favorite thing of people's, it seems like these days. But does that make sense? Does it make sense to try and get another bathroom in this place? Things along those lines. So with that said, I'm gonna let Jamie come up. Got a few deals and stuff that I want to throw out there towards the end. But we're not going to do a slide presentation today. It's just going to be our lovely faces up here, and I'll let Jamie take it away.
Well, thank you.
Absolutely.
Propaganda here for anybody who wants to get it, brochure and cards. If anybody has any questions or wants to contact me at a different time to ask me questions, I'm always happy to talk to people. As Cody said, my name is Jamie Oliver. Some of you may be familiar with Jamie Oliver, the Naked Chef. You guys heard of this famous chef across the world, out of England, has a TV show. Yeah. Jamie Oliver, the Naked Contractor, although I've been told by the police I have to stop doing that. So anyway, I've been the owner of Highlander Construction for 25 years, and we're a mid-sized general contractor builder in the area. We've done a lot of projects, a lot of remodels, a lot of additions, a lot of commercial buildings. For 11 years, I served on the Virginia Board of Contractors. I was appointed originally by Governor Bob McDonald, who was a Republican, and then was reappointed by Governor Terry McAuliffe, who was a Democrat. And I'd like to think that they reappointed me out of both administrations because I worked hard on the board and took the service to the Board of Contractors very seriously. So I'm really, really familiar with all the regulatory issues that go with the governance of your licenses. And that is, as far as contractors are concerned. And that is one aspect of something I'll talk about when I get to the end of my presentation about whether we're going to use a licensed contractor to do work in a project or whether we're going to try to do it ourselves, and some of the things that go around that. So like I said, my company was formed in 1997. We're a mid-sized contractor. Our office is in Blacksburg, and we've been members of the Home Builders Association. And for a period of time, I had my real estate license, but I found that keeping up with all the continuing education and all the fees, and really what I really wanted to get my license so I could understand, the things that the realtors go through when they're marketing and selling properties. And I got a good education on that, and it helped me form better relationships with realtors, for which we worked with over the years. But then ultimately decided that I wanted to focus on the construction and not spend as much time. Plus, evidently people like to look at properties on Saturdays, and that's when tech plays in the fall. So I didn't want to give up.
Do it during
I have a good group of people that I tailgate with on Saturdays, and I didn't want to give that up to pursue a career in real estate. So focus on the construction. What I want to talk with you about today, I noticed, first of all, thanks for the 2005 photo. That's awesome. Pre-teenager photo.
I'm glad you noticed.
Your title, How to Rehab for Big Profits. Let me just tell you right off the bat, the rehab is not where your big profits are going to come. It's the research from where your big profits are going to come. Construction costs have escalated considerably with the pandemic. As materials are limited, labor continues to be a real challenge in our industry. Pricing is outrageous. I'm doing a student housing project right now in Blacksburg and got a bid for the electrical work, and it was twice my budget of what I had budgeted. And so, and I mean, that's several $100,000 of what I had budgeted. So you're really as we continue to be in a housing shortage, which we are, and with interest rates being up, everybody's out there looking for deals, right? Everybody's looking for the property to flip or to find. And so it becomes more of a challenge. The real, because of cost and things, it's not as easy as it used to be to go into a property and rehab it, because you end up spending more money on it. So really, when you're going to rehab for big profits, you really need to research for big profits. I mean, that is where you're going to get your big profits, is from the research, not from the rehab part of it, because I'm afraid those costs continue to escalate and will do so for some time. Builders, over the lifetime of the industry, used to be, the model was, I start as a young guy, I work for a construction company, then I go on my own, and I start with a speculative project or a small remodel or doing an addition, and I build my reputation, and I move from speculative stuff until somebody hires me to do custom stuff. And then along the way, I start making money, and then I start finding properties, and I rehab them myself and turn them into a few rental properties. And when I get to be 60, 65, I've had a good career in construction, and over the time, I've had 10 or 15 rental properties that I've put together with my sweat equity and all the resources that come along with owning a construction company. And all of a sudden, I have this revenue that's in place, so I don't have to be out on a job site at 7 a.m. and 50 degree, 40 degree, 30 degree, 20 degree weather, or 100 degree weather like we're having right now. Unfortunately, that model really has come to an end over the years. It is very, very difficult for builders to find properties, just like it is for anybody else. It used to be that the sweat equity would make up the difference of what you needed to borrow from a bank. So basically, you could get into a property with a bunch of equity because you were doing it yourselves. But that has shrinked a lot. And so you don't see as many builders, amassing rental properties and using that as sort of their cushion. In fact, I don't have that many rental properties. I have a few, but I don't have that many of them. Certainly fewer than I thought I would have at this point in my career. So again, the research part of it is really, really important. And that brings me to my first point. Whenever you're looking at a property, you have to first determine the market for what you think you can get for rent, or if you're going to sell the property, if you're going to flip the property, right? And you can look at a piece of property and be like, oh, it's a good location, but this and that. But if you don't know what your end numbers are first, what the market will bear, it's kind of hard to do any of the other planning. A lot of times people say, oh, this is a great piece of property. I know I'm going to be able to sell it, and they get into it, and there's more work than what they thought they were going to have to do, and they spend more money, and that margin shrinks because they kind of didn't do that up front. So it's really important that whenever you're looking at a piece of property, the very first thing you have to do is determine, what can I get if I'm going to make this a rental and part of my portfolio, or what do I realistically think I can do from a sales proceeds standpoint. That then helps you determine what is your budget for improvements. And your budget for improvements is going to be what you think you can make minus your cost of sales or your cost into it to achieve what you feel is a reasonable rate of return. And everybody's rate of return can be different. Some people may say, I'm not getting into something unless I can make 15%. And if you can, that's great. Right now, if you're looking at things, that 7, 8, 9% is a good number in today's market right now. I mean, it's just the way it is with the interest rates and the tough conditions that we've had with labor and the rise of materials. If you're earning that 7, 8, 9%, you're in a pretty good space. But you have to determine, based on your risk, what rate of return that you want. And you do the math backwards. This is what I can, what the market will bear. This is the rate of return that I expect to have. So this tells me what I can spend. Okay.
That brings up an interesting point for me, because I think a lot of times when I'm evaluating, I'm like, I need to make 20 grand on this property to make it make sense, right? Or it's got to be $30,000, or I need to have X amount of equity in it. But I think a lot of times I lose, like, you don't think about that rate of return necessarily the same. So it's like, if you only put 10 grand in the property, but you're expecting to make 20 grand, like I only have 10,000 in it, that's a 200% return. So it's like, when you really compare, like you just want to keep that in mind, it seems like, as you're going forward, because you've got 50 grand in the property, obviously that is different, return value, like ROI.
Yeah.
But sometimes I think people get a little, I don't want to say greedy, but a little, their
you get fixated on
expectations
you get fixated on a number
high.
that you think you ought to be able to make. But realistically, sometimes that number, when you actually boil it down to what your rate of return is,
right,
you're like, oh man, I could have realistically done this property for half of that,
right,
and still had an exceptional rate of return. And so it reminds me, I went to a home show, a home expo in Las Vegas years ago for the International Builders Show, which is presented by the National Association of Home Builders. And one of the seminars that I went to was talking about large-scale builders and what they have to do to make a profit. And the presenter was like, if you're building 5 houses and you're losing money, what do we have to do to turn it around? And somebody in the audience said, well, you got to do more volume. And he was like, wrong. If you're losing $3,000 a house and you do more volume, you're going to lose more per house.
Yeah.
Yes, you can lower your overhead a teeny bit when you add volume, but if you don't have a formula for making money and making a rate of return that for which you're planning, that's not a recipe for success. So we take that, we have in our mind what we want to make. We know what the market will bear, and the difference between those two is our budget for improvements. Right? Everybody kind of understand where we're going with that? So then we have to determine what is our priority for improvements. And typically when you go into a property, you're looking at it, you're like, oh, a little cabinetry, a coat of paint, maybe replace this flooring. And those are cosmetic improvements. The things that you need to be concerned about most up front is what I call the critical improvements. What is the soundness of the foundation? What is the soundness of the roof? Making sure that we're not getting water infiltration. Water infiltration is the number one thing that damages property. The number one thing. And if you don't believe me, I will cite you the Grand Canyon, because water made the Grand Canyon. Running water. So you want to make sure that you're addressing that issue. Other issues are power. What is our electrical issues? Heating and air conditioning. You could go into a property and on day one, the air conditioning is working, and halfway through your improvements, the air conditioning goes out, and now you're replacing an HVAC system, and that could be, $10,000, $15,000, $18,000, depending on what kind of system, where it is, and so on and so forth. So understanding the critical things, it's easy to kind of go in and say, oh yeah, I know I can, dress this up by putting a new bath vanity in here, and maybe, doing a little, paint or so on. But those are the easy items. The items that you've got to pay attention to most are going to be those critical items regarding power, water, the soundness of the structure, the soundness of the roof, and whether the plumbing fixtures and water heaters and stuff are working. So you want to be making sure you're doing those evaluation first. And so as you're prioritizing your improvement buttons, your realtor, if you're working with a realtor to flip the property, or just a friend who's giving you advice, may say, man, you can flip this if you make the bedroom look better and you make the kitchen look better. And you might do that. But in the process, if you don't take care of a problem with the foundation or the roof, the first rain you get, you're going to have a major problem. So when you start discussing, that budget for improvements, you really need to do your research to determine that you need to go from a worst case scenario. And here's something else that I see whenever people look at doing improvements, whether it's to their own personal house, their commercial building, or if they're looking to flip something. Everybody, it's human nature, takes the best case scenario. if I do this and this and this, it's only going to cost this. And very rarely, when you're in the improvement business, does the best case scenario come to fruition. You know, it's not always the worst case scenario, but it's very, very rarely the best case. So if your target rate of improvement, rate of return based on the improvements that you want to do a property is based on your estimation of the best case scenario, and it's tight, you really ought to pass. You really ought to be like, gosh, because you could find yourself in trouble, and the one thing that none of us in this room want to do is lose money on a property, right? That's the worst thing that can happen. I tell clients all the time, you know, when we're doing projects, and, you know, inevitably, someone will ask for a change order, they want to make a change, and I'll price it for them, and they'll say, oh, gosh, you know, that sounds so expensive. And I'll say, well, you know, there's a contingency for this, a contingency for that, and I said, you know, this is what the market rate for these things are, and, you know, that's the cost of it. And they're like, is there anything you can do? And I was like, yeah, I could take money out of my own pocket and cut a check for a portion of your improvements, but my wife gets really, really upset when I do that. So, you know, it's important that you understand what those potential costs can be. So the difference between cosmetic issues and critical issues, again, cosmetic flooring, cabinetry tops, paint, you know, plumbing fixtures or electrical fixtures. These are things that can really spruce up a space and make it more marketable, but they're not necessarily addressing the core issues, which could cost you the most money and be the most problematic in the space. That brings me down to determining whether you want to engage a general contractor or you want to do the work yourself. And this is an age-old argument. As a builder, as a general contractor, come on in. I will tell you,
Here, I'm just right here.
you can save money in a project if you don't pay me a margin to do it. But there are some things you have to think about in that scenario, okay? Whether you choose to do your own work or you choose to hire somebody really comes down to, do you have the experience and the knowledge to do the work well? Do you have the time and availability to do the work? And time and availability is part of a factor of your rate of return, right? Because your time is worth something, just like my time is worth something. And the last thing is what is the cost? So let's take an example of HVAC system, okay? My company probably pays HVAC contractors for our portfolio work annually somewhere in the neighborhood of $250,000 to $450,000. Okay, so when I call them, they answer the phone because they're like, hey, this is a good client. And they know that if they don't give me good pricing, that there's 3 or 4 other companies that I work with regularly that are likely to give me numbers. So they give me good, solid numbers, good market-based numbers. But when you call, especially if you're a first-time person, the person at the end of the phone is thinking, this is a one-time shot for me, and they're going to give you a different set of pricing. So if the cost of a project comes down to, yeah, I didn't pay a GC a margin, but I got bumped by 8 or 9 contractors, subcontractors, trade contractors, and vendors in the process. Guess what? That probably paid for the GC, and it cut your time in the project down by 9/10. Instead of you being there every day and doing the work and Saturdays and Sundays and at nights, you're there doing a walkthrough once a week until the project is done. So depending on the type of improvements that you're going to do, should direct you towards whether you need to hire a professional to help you. If you go into a property and it simply needs some cabinets and some flooring and some paint, you don't need a general contractor, okay? Those are all things that you can easily supervise, that you can easily find good vendors. And then once you do 2 or 3, you'll start to get better pricing from those because they'll realize that you're going to start using them and they'll start giving you preferred or better pricing because you're being loyal to them and you develop a good relationship. But if you're getting into knocking down walls, reframing, having to solidify some structural aspect of the foundation or the roof, if you're getting into having to bring an electrician in, a plumber, redoing the HVAC, these are all things that require a lot of expertise. And the last thing I will say to you is, when you go to do this work on your own, the trade contractors, even if they give you good pricing, they will get to you, but your work isn't going to be a top priority for them because they're not going to not come to my job site tomorrow for $400,000 of work this year and next year to come to your jobs, to your spot to make $4,000 one time. It takes time to build that relationship up and so that they know that it's an ongoing business. So when you kind of get into the discussion of you take your time and your level of expertise and your cost. And what I'll tell you is there's a lot of times where when you factor your time and the cost that I will get, or not necessarily me, but other qualified builders, it can bring that margin down quite a bit. It's all of a sudden it's not as big of a difference as you originally thought.
So, question on that real quick. There's a threshold for like the investor, right? That says, this isn't that much stuff. I feel like I can get, somebody come out and paint, redo the trim, put a couple vanities in, put some lipstick on it. Is there also a threshold for like a general contractor where they say, this isn't worth my time? Like there's not enough stuff here? Because I'm sure some investors have contacts in certain areas, but not others. And even if taking down a wall is involved or adding a bathroom, and this probably changes per contractor, I'm sure, but
it does.
Is there a certain level of where most GCs are like, that's not a big enough job for me? I would either just sub it out anyway or something like that.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so let me tell you, for instance, in my own company, my general rule is $100,000. And part of that is because we're a true builder and GC. So we have qualified superintendents that are on the project, and I just can't guarantee the quality of a project if we don't have the correct supervision on the site. The motto that we have with all of our superintendents is you get what you inspect, not what you expect. Okay? If you expect people to show up and do a good job, guess what? You're going to get screwed. You have to do your inspections every single day. You got to know what they're doing. You got to follow it. You got to watch it, and so on. And so I tell people when they call, hey, I can refer you to some other folks who do, smaller remodeling or smaller work, and you can get a better value for your money. We'll always help somebody when they call. I mean, if we have the capacity and the volume to do it. But I'm always truthful in saying you're going to end up paying us more on this particular project than you would if you use somebody else, because we're a larger company and we have superintendents and estimators and interior designer on staff, and all those people get involved with the project. So $100,000 is about our threshold. Now I have some exceptions to that. One of the exceptions to that is if we built the project previously and like I said, we built a nice custom house for somebody and they come back to us 2 years later and say, we want to finish the basement. Yeah, we're going to do that, and we're going to do it for a lower number because they already gave us their business, and they, and especially if they've been great about referring us and so on and so forth, we're always going to honor the customers that we've had previously. The second time when we do things is when I get involved in a project and I'm an investor in a project. A lot of times, if I'm working on a flip or something like that, and I don't do a tremendous amount of them, but if I do and I get involved in it, obviously I'm trying to bring the best numbers we can because I'm also an investor like you all are in the property, and I want to maximize that. So we do have exceptions, and we also have done some things. I will tell you that my company is very committed to helping veterans. We've done a lot of projects to help veterans. A few years ago, we built a 3,500 square foot house, 5,000 when you added all the land and stuff around it, the amenities outside, for a veteran who lost 2 limbs in Afghanistan, and we did that in conjunction with Gary Sinise's national charity, and that was an awesome project. And we particularly, when somebody calls us and says, hey, we're a veteran, that's just something that's near and dear to my heart. My dad is a former retired Marine, and so that's something that's really important. So we do make exceptions in that. But to your point, yeah, these are some friends of mine, so I'll just tell you, Ed Tuckler with Shelter Alternatives, fantastic builder, right? Great builder, not cheap. Right. He's not someone who's going to come in and do $10,000 of work for you. He has too many other projects that he can do. But there are always, the same thing with, say, Nancy Phillips, who's a great builder, or Justin and Jason Boyle, good friends, and they do a great job. Really, and I will say this: we're blessed in the Newer Valley that we have a lot of great builders and remodelers. Tim with Blue Ridge is great, really quality person. I've said many times that if I wasn't my own builder and wasn't building my own stuff, I would have a hard time picking somebody because we have a lot of good ones. And but these are also some of the larger, more experienced companies, and they're going to have a different threshold. But there are also lots of young guys and young people, I don't know just guys, young people coming along in the industry that are looking, and this is how they get their start, right? So I think that the younger guy, Caleb, who's doing some great work, commercial work. I can't remember his last name.
Is that Caleb Chafin?
Yeah.
Prince off
and so there's a lot of younger.
He did this one, right?
Yeah. A lot of younger folks that are coming along. They're doing great work, and they're starting to build their business versus someone like me that's there's waxing and waning right now. I'm waxing and he's waning, so or vice versa. So there's always a threshold, and that threshold is going to change based on economic conditions too, right? We go into a recession and work starts drying up and houses aren't selling, you're going to see a lot of people whose threshold is going to come way down.
Right.
I mean, that's just the way it is. I mean, they'll, the project when they were willing to, weren't willing to do it for less than 300, it's now 50,000.
Right.
But right now in the marketplace, it's still a pretty active market, even with the interest rates where they are, especially in the Blacksburg market. And so there's definitely a threshold. I don't really think about it from a standpoint of the builder's threshold. What I really think about it is from the investor's improvement budget and what they can spend. Right. I mean, so I don't want to say. I think you can always find someone who's qualified to do work for you, even if it's small amounts of work. I think you can always find someone qualified, and then once you start building relationships, you can. It's easier.
Right.
But you're going to deal with a threshold when you're using more experience folks.
So I had another question.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'll let you finish your presentation, but I'm curious, sitting around and like going into these properties ourselves, right? It's really hard to find someone who has the time, like as a contractor, to meet you out there on the first visit or even the second visit to say, okay, this is around what I'm looking at as far as budget goes. I know what I can spend based on the ARV and what I'm purchasing it for, but what are some tools that we can use, or some ranges that you can expect in certain areas of the home, like a new kitchen or a new bathroom? Can you say, okay, for a bathroom, and we're not going all out here, like putting, granite marble in the bathroom, but can I expect to spend $4,000 to $7,000 on a bathroom if I'm gutting it and remodeling it? Same thing for a kitchen or
So I'll start. That's a great question, and I don't answer the phone myself nearly as much as I used to, because we have other people in the office too. I used to answer the phone every time it rang, for a lot of years.
Right.
And now that responsibility is shared. But I can't tell you. I mean, if I had $100 for every time I got this question, I would have retired. Hey, how you doing? I'm fine. How are you? I'm thinking, my wife and I are thinking about building something. What are you building for a square foot? I don't know. What are we building? Where are we building it? I just, that's an impossible question to ask, to answer, particularly because there's such a high range of it too. So if I say to you, Cody, what's it going to take for you to get a car? Well, your first question is, well, what kind of car? Is it new? Is it used? What am I doing? You can work off of some averages, but it's a dangerous precedent to work off averages, especially in a challenging market. The bottom line is, it's better to go ahead and find someone that will work with you on giving you hard numbers. And I'm not saying that's easy, because people are busy.
Right.
So if every single person in this room said, hey, Jamie said call him anytime, and every one of you called me and said, can you come look at a property next week? I couldn't possibly go and look at every property with every one of you next week. But I could go to 2 of them or 3 of them. And I do that all the time. In fact, I'll tell you that I have a client that we just finished a 13,000 square foot house that I looked at properties with him for 6 years. And halfway through that 6 years, I got to a point where the phone rang and I'd look and I'd be like, oh man, it's a whole other Friday of just driving around and looking at properties. Nothing's ever going to come from this. And then all of a sudden, we end up with a multi-million-dollar project out of it, and something did come from it. And so my thing is this, for me personally, I'm always interested in helping people to the best of my ability. I can't spend all day, every day, looking at properties for no compensation, but I'm certainly willing to do it on occasion. And I'm willing to go and look at stuff and say, hey, these are major areas of concern. Hey, this is the things you need to really look at. And I can give you some general ideas on the property. Now, there's a difference between how often you do that versus whether you're going to end up paying for that service or not paying for that service. I mean,
I guess the big thing for me is being able to, you're trying to weed out properties that that aren't worth me calling you about, right? So like if I walk into it and I'm like, okay, this needs a kitchen. We need to take all the cabinets out, gut it. How much is it going to cost in a range of, can I, the kitchen's going to be, you're right, that there are a lot of things that play factors into it, but you have to be able to start weeding out things like as you walk through it. And if you're not familiar with the range, you wouldn't be able to do it.
Yeah.
Yep.
And I'm sorry I didn't get to introduce myself because I'm new to the area.
Congrats.
And anyway,
Welcome.
So I came to town on 610, and there was a little neighborhood over there that looks like a low mid-range neighborhood, right?
Mm-hmm.
Older houses. So I'm not an agent, real estate agent. What is the price point on those houses?
I'm not sure exactly what area you're talking about, but is it in Christiansburg?
Yeah, as you're coming in on 610, there's a little neighborhood over there, older houses.
Okay.
That look like they should be flipping over.
Yeah, so people are flipping those. It's like Park Street, that area of Christiansburg. It depends on if it's fixed up or not.
No.
Yeah. You're probably getting those, I don't know, 150,000, 200,000.
150,000 house. That's your house. It's a medium range house. We want it to be the nicest house in that neighborhood. So we're going to be putting the subway in the kitchen and the white cabinets and a nice mid-range handle and maybe an island, and those kitchens are not super big.
Mm-hmm.
So should we do how much a square foot for a kitchen that is a mid-range kitchen?
Yeah, the square footage is probably helpful when you're like, because it does depend on the size of the house, depends on the size of the bathroom, depends on the size of the.
So let me dodge that question by answering.
I guess give us some tools to be able to do some of the work ourselves before.
Yeah, no, I understand.
Before we get to the point of.
So when a client comes in and they're talking to us about a remodel or an addition or a new build, and we sit down and we start talking, I ask them questions so that I can give them that kind of range. If I say to Cody, you got some apartments in Giles, and you're looking to do studios.
Mm-hmm.
I know because I'm in the business, I know sort of what your max rent is going to be. So right off the bat, I know you're not going to Ideal down the street here. I mean, I love Ideal; they do a great job, but
you're going.
They don't have any low base cabinets. They're going to start medium base and go from there, right?
Right.
So we're probably talking about limiting the cabinet options by going to Lowe's or Home Depot. These are obviously the things that come off the shelf are going to be somewhat lower quality cabinetry. But you can generally kind of get a sense if you're doing a general L shape, your cabinets are probably going to run a couple $1,000. You're probably going to look at 500 to 700 to install them with a qualified person if you're not doing it yourself. And then you have to decide what kind of tops you're going to do. And it's pretty easy to get pricing on tops. I mean, anybody can really call a granite company and say, what is your granite, what are your tier 1 granite per square foot cost? You can call Lowe's and ask them what your pre-order for mica cost is going to be. I mean, those are things that you can do. It's really, I go back to the very first thing I said was really you have to identify where your market is so that you can identify what you have to do. If you're talking about smaller, older properties, smaller kitchens that maybe don't have space for islands, I mean, you probably are looking at a $4,000 to $8,000 range. If you're going to a medium-sized house in like Woodland Hills in Blacksburg, those houses may be 25 or 30 years old, but if you're rehabbing those, you're probably a $25,000 or $35,000 budget.
Well, you got to your point, you've got room in your margins that it brings it up to to match those
to match what the level is going to be. So it's doing that research up front, and so we engage our clients in a conversation about what is it you want and what is your budget. And people will start off by I want mahogany and I want the highest tier granite, and I'm like, cool, that's $150,000. And they're like, okay, what can we do for 25?
Right.
And I'm like, maple with a tier 1 granite.
Right.
Okay. I mean, if that's what you do. So, and I understand the difficulty of the evaluation process, which is when you're going in, you don't necessarily have you don't have the contract experience, so you wonder. But I will tell you, pretty much any type of estimating ability that you want is available online. Okay, it's really funny. I hired a young person out of Virginia Tech a few years ago, and primarily what I hired him to help us with administrative tasks, and also to help take a little bit of the estimating load off of me, because at that time I was doing 100% of the estimating for the company for up front on projects. And we started the process. I bought some books for him. I got him a couple programs, a book on plan reading and whatever. He was a little slow to want to read those materials and study those materials. Okay. So one day he's like, I just don't know how to do this. And I said, we'll just say Schmo. We'll just use that as an name. The Schmo, you can Google anything. I was like, just type in the Google, how do I estimate a roof? And it popped up a formula thing that said the size and this, and like in 30 seconds he had put that information in and had answered. And I said, you don't have to ask me how to do that. You can Google almost anything at this point. And you can too. There are books that are out there that you can buy that give you the national averages of different kinds of construction work, drywall work and things like that. But you can also, if you will spend the time and make calls up front, you can also kind of get answers from people before you even go to a property. And so this is one of the things I was going to touch on. If you're getting into this business and you want to do these evaluations your own on yourself up front, you're going to have to study and learn how to do some of these things. And some people are like, I don't want to study and I don't want to learn. If I can't pay someone to do it and still make a profit, I'm not going to do it. Guess what? That's great. That's kind of the way I feel about it, honestly, with my own properties. If I can't find a deal that I can do our normal construction with and still flip it, I'm probably not interested in it because I'm way too busy to spend a weekend sanding drywall. On the other hand, you can literally go through and build your kind of own database with the basics of how much things are going to cost. Let's talk about drywall, okay? There are lots of drywall contractors out there. You can literally call them and say, I'm thinking about doing a project. What do you usually charge per board? And most drywall guys will tell you, most drywall people will tell you, hey, we charge, including the board, $55 a board or $65 a board.
And that's like the sheetrock.
Hung and finished sheetrock. Okay? And yes, there are changes. I mean, that's a standard board with an 8-foot ceiling. If you want to go to a 9-foot ceiling and you're doing 4.5-foot board, it's going to be a little bit more. So you kind of got to know what you're, but then you just do the math. You take the plane of the wall, you break it down into square feet, you figure out how many boards you're going to use. And all these formulas are available by Googling, every single one of them. But you got to do it. Mm-hmm. And so here's the thing. Your question to me is, how do we go in and kind of evaluate a property and before we even ask a GC to look at it? Well, you go to school. You go to school and you figure out, you do some research.
Or learn the hard way.
Or lose. I'll never forget when I first got into construction, I went to a Virginia home builders event. And the guy who ran the whole thing, Mike Tolson, John, remember Mike Tolson? The guy who ran the whole thing, he put his arm around, he's like, oh, we're so glad to have you here. He's like, you want to know how to make $1 million in building? And I was like, yes, sir. He goes, start off with 2. Because you're going to lose $1 million for the first few years that you do it, right? He's like, so, I mean, and there's some truth to that. So, the easy answer is there's no magic wand that you're going to wave short of bringing a professional in to do an evaluation of a property. And a professional will come in and do evaluations for properties for you. They're just not going to do every property every time because they just don't have the time to do that.
Which is why you need to gain the skills to be able to.
That's why you need to gain the skills.
Yeah.
And so, you start with the things that you're not going to be able to figure out on your own is going to be the critical systems that we talked about. These are systems and things that you're always going to need a professional who's got that experience in trade contractor to tell you. I mean, you're just not going to go in on your own without having electrical experience and say, this panel board and the breakers are great. I've got enough power for the things I want to do. You're very rarely going to be able to go in to take the covers off the HVAC equipment and say, yeah, this coil looks right and it's not going to go on me. And, and the ductwork is operating efficiently and so on. The cosmetic stuff is things that all of you could easily do, but you have to spend the time up front preparing for it. And this is work that you do before you go to a property. You spend a little time getting paint quotes on averages, drywall quotes. You go to the local, Floored in Christiansburg or the LV Flooring at Marketplace or these other places. You talk to them about the square footage of the average tiles that they sell. You talk to them about the tile guys that you're using, the tile people that you're using. What are they charging per square foot? What if they're doing and these people want to sell you stuff, right? So they will spend time with you and sort of educate you on that process. And you basically can create a spreadsheet. You can create, a Word document or something that you then, when you go and sort of your own checklist, and you can go to these properties, you can start evaluating. It's very easy to go to Lowe's. You can actually do it online. You can go to Lowe's online and look at their off-the-shelf cabinets are all listed online. So if you know that your dimension from this point to this point is 8 feet and it doesn't have a sink in it, you could literally go and add up 8 feet of cabinetry, wall and thing, and get an average of the off-the-shelf white base level available cabinetry and run some quick numbers on it. Okay.
I know one thing that's helped us in that regard is like after you've done a few, like with our rentals, we were doing a lot of like buy, rehab, rent. Some of them we were kind of burring and doing a refinance, pulling money out to buy another one. But we got to the point where we were using the same materials in every property that we were doing. So you knew like, okay, we're putting tile in this bathroom. This is how big it is. This is how much we paid, 3 months ago for the same tile. So we just have to do the calculation and it's easy to figure out. That's how much we pay for the toilet, to tile a shower. So the more you do it, the easier it gets to walk in and say, okay.
Absolutely. The only caveat I would say to that is make a phone call before you sign off on the final number.
Yeah, sure.
Because the price fluctuation is so crazy right now that you might have paid $8 a square foot for tile 3 months ago, and now it's 12.
Right.
Particularly as one type of material runs out that was made under previous economic conditions, and now it's the new stuff is coming in and it's under the new production and labor rates and things and taxes and regulations and all those other things, and it's just more expensive. And so it's always worthwhile to make a phone call.
Sure.
And so, I guess, one of the things when I spoke to Cody about coming and sort of doing this presentation was, if you all came tonight expecting me to say there's a magic wand and you utter this phrase from Harry Potter and all of your estimating happens without you having to do any work, it doesn't happen. The last thing is that you can always engage a relationship with somebody in which you pay people for their time. And if your purpose is to end up having 25 rental properties, it probably makes sense to engage in a relationship where you can get a professional evaluation of a property prior to making a decision on it. And like I said, I think most builders and developers are willing to lend their time, a portion of their time, to people getting into this industry and looking. It's just they can't do every property every time. So I mean, if Cody says, "Hey man, I think I got a property, I want you to come look at it," of course. I mean, Cody's my friend. We play cards together. I love taking Cody's money. It's one of my favorite things to do.
It's been happening a lot more recently for some reason.
The only person I like taking their money more is Chris Fole, who's not here tonight. But he calls me and says, "He's my friend. I'm going to go look at the property with him." And I'm going to say to him, and I see this problem, I see that problem. I can sort of give him some professional advice about, you're probably going to get in this, you're probably going to get in that. Then Cody has to make a decision. How much do I want to gamble on my own? Or am I interested in, asking Jamie to do more of a professional estimate of what these systems and these things are going to be? And for me personally, I tend to do those on a very low margin, but I have to cover the cost of the employees that work for us, or else we wouldn't be able to afford to have them on staff. Okay. So just a couple other quick notes I wanted to mention to you. Going back to deciding if you're going to do it yourself, again, experience and knowledge, your time and availability, and making sure you're factoring that in to what your overall cost is going to be, and then the actual cost. I wrote down to tell you about sources of estimating, because that's really the key to it, is you spending some time getting a base knowledge of estimating. And there are lots of sources. There are books. You can go into Amazon and type in a subject matter of estimating for rehab. Okay? You'll get 15 books that'll come up. And these books are written by people like me who can no longer be on a job site. And and they will walk you through, this is how you do this, this is how you do that. But guess what? Just because when you buy the book, you have to read it. And you actually have to call and get the square foot number of what the drywall costs or whatever. Because there is no magic wand where those numbers are certainly going to materialize. And the other thing is when I go to look at a property, I haven't done the research most of the time. I mean, if I've been in that neighborhood before, maybe I'd have some knowledge of it. But when I go someplace like the neighborhood you're talking about, I'm not going to walk in and be like, "Yep, I know that 4 houses sold for $400,000 in the last 6 months." Cody can look that information up, but I'm not going to have that knowledge. So I'm not going to tell you, yeah, you don't want to do the base Lowe's cabinets. You want to go with the basic builder line that Ryco has, and you're not going to want to go with just Formica, but let's go with a tier 1 granite, because that's going to be in the same level of these other properties. But then you still have to make sure it comes within your budget. Last but not least, and I'm happy to answer any questions. I do want to talk to you for a second about the Board of Contractors. Okay. As I mentioned, I served on the Board of Contractors for 11 years, and the Board of Contractors is the body that regulates all licensed contractors. Okay? In Virginia, if you do more than $1,500 of work a year as a contractor, you are required to have a contractor's license, to be licensed by the state of Virginia. It is not always enforced by the locality. I remember talking to Mary Pettit a few years ago, who's our esteemed Commonwealth's attorney here in Montgomery County, and I was griping to her about the fact that we had had a rash of people that had called the Board of Contractors to complain about problems that they had on their sites. And it turned out that those problems were created because the homeowners were using unlicensed subcontractors. The Board of Contractors doesn't regulate unlicensed subcontractors. The only thing that can happen is the local prosecutor, the local Commonwealth's attorney, has to decide if they want to prosecute somebody who's operating as an unlicensed subcontractor. And therein lies the rub, because as Mary told me, Jamie, we hardly have the resources to go after the murderers and the drug dealers and the people who are violently assaulting people. She's like, if some guy loses his job and he wants to go build decks, I'm not going to prosecute that. And that created an interesting rub. But let me explain to you what the other side of that coin is. When you do your own personal project and you hire a general contractor who's licensed, you can always go to the Board of Contractors if there's something that's happening that doesn't seem right. You feel like someone's cheating you, they're not doing what they're supposed to do. You can go to that regulatory body and you can file a complaint against them, and it is fully investigated. And there's all sorts of repercussions when someone is found guilty of violating the regulatory standards that comes with a license. If you have an investment property, but there is a difference between your personal house and an investment property. Okay, one of the resources that the Board of Contractors has is called the Contractor Recovery Fund. You have a house that's your personal residence. You have work done. The contractor screws you. You try to go after them. They don't have any money. You can apply to get money back from the Contractor's Recovery Fund. It's like a last resort insurance policy. But that Contractor Recovery Fund is only available for your primary residence. It is not applicable to investment properties. Okay? Now, you can still file a complaint and it will be adjudicated. And there are still ramifications for a contractor who violates standards on a commercial property or an investment property, just like your personal property. The only difference is you can't ask for a payment from the recovery fund if it's an investment property.
They have to be licensed, right?
They have to be licensed. Yeah. Right. So if you're and that's the other part of it. If you call and complain because the person came and did your HVAC work and they weren't licensed, you're screwed. You might be able to go to a court of law and adjudicate something, but it's very unlikely that you'll ever get a claim on that. And here's the last part, and I'll tell you. There are rules about how many properties you can build and sell without a license. Does everybody know that here in the room, right? You are limited for your own properties and how many properties you can go and make improvements to and then turn around and sell until you're required to get a contractor's license. And the reason is that people used to try to get around having a contractor's license by like, oh, I'm building this for myself. It's my own house. Well, it's funny. You've had 6 houses this year. Yeah, I move around a lot, right? And so they put restrictions in to say that you have to live in a house. I think it's 1 for 2 years. Okay, 1 for 2 years. Otherwise, if you're turning around and selling them, otherwise you have to get a contractor's license to do that.
Do you know what that limit is?
It's 1 house for every 2 years.
No, I'm saying like if you're flipping a house, like so how does that work? Is it only if you're doing the work on the house yourself?
Correct.
Okay, gotcha.
Right. So if you go and hire a licensed contractor like an electrician, but a lot of times people do all their own work, and and they're claiming the exemption because they said that's their house, their personal house. And I will tell you that you might not get caught the first 2 or 3 times you do that because it takes a while for people to catch on, but they do catch on. And once you're found to be doing that, your likelihood of getting a license in the future is very unlikely. When they find that you're intentionally violating the laws of Virginia, they're not anxious to be like, you got away with it for a while. But come on in and get licensed, and we'll hook you up, and you can do it on your own anyway, right? So when you're planning improvements to your properties, keep in mind that you know, especially if you're selling, if you're turning them into rental properties, not a big deal. If they're investment property and you're turning them into a rental, you don't have that issue. But if you're doing it to flip to sell and you're acting as a contractor on an investment property, you will run into problems eventually over time with that process. So keep that in mind when you're doing that.
If you're GCing it yourself, but there's subs doing it that are licensed, does that get around it, or is that considered you working as a contractor?
It depends on the stuff that you're doing yourself.
Okay.
It depends on the stuff you're doing. I mean, if you're acting as a GC on an investment property, they want you to be licensed.
I know some states won't let you GC your own properties. Like South Carolina, you have to.
Yeah. Virginia will.
Yeah.
When they say GC, it depends on what you mean by being a GC.
I guess
if you're talking about, hey, I called the painter and I called the drywall guy and I called the electrician and they were all licensed again, that is not a thing. If you're going and pulling a permit and you're managing an addition, you're doing structural changes to the property, and you don't have a contracts license, and you're pulling the permit for those works, then you're going to have to be licensed.
Gotcha.
Unless you're just doing one every 2 years.
Right.
Right. So I just wanted to make sure you understand when you're going to use a contractor, make sure that they're licensed. Make sure that you see their insurance. And I hate to tell you all this, make sure you call and check the insurance. Okay? I will tell you, we're a GC. We've been in this for a long time. I would say 1 out of every 5 new contractors that come to us wanting to do work submits to me fake insurance certificates. And guess what? If they give you a fake insurance certificate and something happens, they don't pay you in fake dollars. There's no case. You don't get anything. Yeah. Well, so they send you a certificate, and the insurance company's on there, and you call them up and be like, "Hey, I got an insurance certificate from Acme Flooring. Just wanted to make sure that they're currently insured." And I will. It's sad, but I will tell you. Often they will say they were insured, but their expiration was 6 months ago. Well, that's weird because the certificate I got shows that their expiration is next year. No, I think that might be an error, and they do the Michael Jackson moonwalk backwards because they don't want to get their person in trouble.
Right.
But that just tells you, if you're willing to fake an insurance certificate, I'm not sure that's the kind of people you want to be in business. You want to hire, right? So make sure they're licensed, make sure they're insured, and check the insurance certificate. Make a phone call and check to make sure, okay? License, it's so easy. DPOR.com, Virginia DPOR, all you do is Google Virginia DPOR, D David O, Paul Robert. The first thing that comes, did I say that right?
No.
That's okay. Did I get that wrong?
Dyslexic much.
Yeah. Professional Occupancy and Regulation. It's the Department of Professional Occupancy and Regulation, so DPOR.
It's like that meme with all
the... David, Paul, Oliver, Robert.
Reggie.
Anyway, if you just Google that, it takes you to the home page, and the first thing on that page is license lookup. And you just put the name in, and it'll come up and be like, yep, this person doesn't have a license. And that's the last part that I'll share with you, and then I'll take a few questions, is even if you're doing an investment property and you're not eligible to go to the contractor recovery fund, you're still eligible to report that trade contractor for disciplinary reasons if they screw you. And I will tell you this, and how many of you have run into this? I did a project and they did a great job for 85% of it, and then I just couldn't get them to come back to fix this, and I couldn't get them to come back. They stopped taking my call. They wouldn't return my call. Guess what? They left town, right? Guess what? They don't care if you file a lawsuit because you had to spend the time and the money on it, and maybe they don't have a lot of assets, and maybe they don't care, and they'll wait till the last second to pay it. But what? You file a complaint with the Board of Contractors and the board can take their ability to make a living, they respond to you immediately. I tell people all the time, you call people a couple times and they don't return your calls, file a complaint with DPOR. I guarantee you, when DPOR calls them and says, we received a complaint and you need to answer this complaint, because they send an investigator. The Board of Contractors has the second largest investigative staff in Virginia behind the state police. They have investigators all over the state, and all they do is go and look at complaints that consumers make about licensed contractors. And by the way, some of the times the complaints are absolute bullshit, pardon my language. Sometimes it's, I'm unhappy because I wanted my wall painted green and I picked the color, but I didn't like how it turned out. I want the contractor to repaint it, but I don't want to pay for it. And they say, no, this is the color. And I say, I want you to repaint it. No, I can't do that. I already painted it. Then they file a complaint at the board, and the board looks at it, and the board says, hey, this is not a regulatory matter. This is an issue that you need to take to a civil court, right? But if it's, I paid a deposit and the person didn't show up, that's a regulatory matter. Or if you paid them and they did a project and they didn't show up to finish it, they did 90% and didn't show up for the last 10, they didn't honor their warranty, or they abandoned the project. These are things that they can lose their license. They can lose their ability to make a living. And so I encourage you, when you do these things, make sure you use someone who's licensed. Make sure you use someone who's insured. It only takes one project to ruin you financially if you use someone who's not licensed and insured and they screw you. It could cost you thousands and thousands of dollars. And you might have done really well on this one and this one and this one, and you're doing great. And then all of a sudden, you use this one and you get screwed for thousands and thousands of dollars. And all this other hard work was for nothing. Okay? So it's very easy to check licenses when you get those insurance certificates. And by the way, if you ask a contractor for an insurance certificate and they act like you don't know what they, oh yeah, I mean, yeah, sure, we can get you. Listen, this is standard practice. It is standard practice. If somebody even hesitates about giving you an insurance certificate, chances are that they've got a problem. I mean, it's so easy. I'm just like, yeah, my insurance agents, insurance agents send them out all day long, every day for projects, okay? So those are the things you want to do. Keep in line the limits, and then I'll be happy to answer any questions you have. And I want to start off with, what are we building for a square foot?
Yeah,
anyone want to know that?
really on number one.
Yeah. Any questions? Yes, ma'am.
Because I'm in the area.
Sure.
So sheathing that's covered in plaster, is it okay to just put sheetrock on top of that?
Well, sure. I mean, but you do have to make sure you don't want to cover up things that can't be covered up. So generally, can you take new drywall and cover up old lath and plaster? Sure you can. But it has to be done correctly, which means, you might need to have fastener, structural members that are put in place to make sure that the new drywall is supported correctly. So it's not just as easy if you go and you see a wall and it's like, oh, I'll just put a piece of thing. You also need to know, is there electrical behind it? Am I covering up a vent? There are other things that you need to make sure that you do, but generally you can cover up old lath and plaster with new drywall, generally. And lath and plaster, remember, we're all in this situation where we're all looking for older properties and properties that we can potentially rehab. And lath and plaster is a pain in the butt. I mean, you get into these older houses that had, basically lath and plaster, which is, it was a drywall front, and then they put chicken wire, and then they used this heavy duty, and it thick. And a lot of times they insulated with horse feathers and other stuff. I mean, like newspaper. Yeah, I mean, all sorts of stuff.
We have those around here.
Yeah, we really do. I mean, yeah, it's, I did a restaurant in Tazewell that was a 200-year-old building, and it had been a school. It had been a community center, and before we started making a restaurant, it was a funeral home. And I'll tell you a quick story about this. I went down to do an evaluation of the property, and when the funeral home had closed, the local high school used it for a couple years to do a haunted house in, where they made some money, right? I did not know that. Nobody told me that. So we're there during the day. I'm checking out the attics and all these systems and whatever. And so we're getting ready to leave, and it's twilight. And everybody's getting their car and leaving. I was like, damn it, I forgot to look at the casket shaft in the back of the building where they lifted the caskets to the various levels of when it was a funeral parlor. And I was like, oh man, I said, I don't want to drive back. So I was like, I'll go. So I get a flashlight out of my car and I go down and I unlock it and I walk in. I'm, looking, around, checking to see what's the structure of, because we're going to have to demo that, was going to be demoed. What kind of old casket lift did it have in there? And I walk through and I get to the shaft and I do this and I turn around and I do this. And at that old haunted house, they had left a ghoul head, like in the shaft of that thing. And I'm not going to tell you, it about scared the crap out of me. I dropped off my, and I walked and I was like, what was it? And it's sort of looking and I was like, so you never know what you're going to find when you start looking through stuff. We did one of the things my company did for a long time. We designed and built fraternity and sorority houses on college campuses all across the country. And I was doing a project up in Pennsylvania, and it was an old fraternity house, and they wanted to basically demo one section of the house and build a huge addition on it. And so we were there first couple weeks, and we were starting to do demo, and we tore walls at it. It turned out there was a secret room in the fraternity house, and somebody had collected and actually collected and put it in plastic, vintage Playboys. Oh. And there were like 4 boxes of them. And I asked the fraternity, I was like, what do you want to do with this? He was like, oh, that's just throw them away or whatever. We took them to a local shop and got like $2,000 for them. It was great. So you never know what you're going to find when you start tearing into stuff and demoing stuff. So
one question that I have, you started talking about like some regulations and stuff like that. Yeah. And I know, obviously, being on the board of contractors and the Home Builders Association, which also, if anybody, like if you're looking for people to call or you are subbing stuff out, the Home Builders Association, which we're a member of, I know some of the other people in here, is a great resource to try and find like a roofer or any really subcontractor, even somebody to come clean your carpet. They have a list of members that are vendors and builders and everything.
And you can search it by trade.
Right,
so exactly. You can put in there,
So that's a good resource if you're looking for people or you're new to the area and need some help. Those people are pretty vetted. But my question was going to be, are there any like regulations or changes to the building code or anything in the pipeline that we may not be aware of when you are doing those initial evaluations where it could change your numbers like drastically in certain areas or something that we need to look out for, So
the building code changes every 3 years.
Right.
It's adopted. So it's in Virginia, they take the national code and they have a board like the Board of Contractors. Steve Simonis was on that board, John, a few years ago, that took all the suggestions and the current national building code, and then they go through and say, okay, we're gonna eliminate that and not require it in Virginia, or we're gonna add this and make it even more restrictive, right, or whatever in Virginia. So keeping up with that in the profession is important. When it comes to remodeling houses, there's usually a threshold you have to go over before the building official will require you to bring it up to current code. And let me just tell you this, you always want to avoid that threshold.
Right.
If you get to a point where you think that the improvements you're going to do to this property is going to push you to the point where you have to bring the entire house or building for a reasonable amount of money. There are some exclusions and some exceptions, and a lot of the architectural community works with that. There's rehab codes and other things that you could potentially get into. But I will just tell you this, every time they create an exception to something, there's always a trade-off. Yep, we'll let you rehab this old building and not bring it up to current code, except we want you to have solar panels and we want you to have this and that. And when you add all that stuff up, and you take this and it's like, well, shit, I could have just rehabbed it to the current code.
Right.
I mean, so there are thresholds for that. Yes. I'm trying to think, more than 40% of the total square footage. I think I'm going off the top of my head. John, you might know of the 40s. I think it's more than 40% increase of square footage, or if you do work that increases the overall value of the property by 50%.
I know change of use too is a big thing.
Oh,
So
yeah, change of use is always
changing,
yeah.
especially in commercial. Like
Oh, commercial,
yeah.
you're going to change usage. You're bringing up the current code.
Right. Same thing with multifamily. If you're adding units,
yeah.
You know, you can add bedrooms as long as they conform and stuff like that. But if you're going from a 9-plex and turning it into a 12-plex somehow, that's going to be something that
particularly the accessibility standards.
Mm-hmm.
And let me say this to you, as far as if you're ever looking at apartments and stuff. I grew up with an aunt who was a ballerina in New York City when she was 16 years old, professional ballerina, and she contracted polio and ended up being paralyzed from the waist down the rest of her life. My aunt just passed away at 89 a few months ago. Okay, I have always in my entire life been cognizant about ADA accessibility standards. It's something that's important to me because I saw my entire life my aunt struggle with bathrooms at church and at going to relatives' houses for parties. So I have always been someone that, particularly in the stuff that we design, hey, let's make sure we have a 3-foot hallway. Let's make sure we have doors. That is something I was doing because it was important to me, because I grew up seeing it before the building code made you change to it. But now the building code has changed and said, if you're doing a one-level house, that ground floor has to be completely accessible. You have to have an accessible size bathroom. You have to have an accessible size pathway for a single-family home. And why are they doing that? So that somebody has the option to buy that property who may be disabled. It has added cost to it, because if you're doing a 3-foot or 4-foot hallway as opposed to a smaller hallway or doors, it can add cost to it. So that is something that you need to think about when you're going into it. Is if you try to add on square footage, if you're greatly changing the overall value of the property, or if you're changing usages, those are all going to be things that are going to add and cost you a lot more money.
So you're saying if I bought one of the $150,000 and I put $75,000 in it's bigger, they have to open up all the doorways.
It could, depending on.
ADA is really only commercial though, right?
No, it's the building code now is requiring ADA standards in new houses and new construction. Yeah. You don't have to have a house, for instance, you don't have to put a residential elevator in.
Right.
If you have a second floor, but you must have, under the new building code, an accessible pathway to egress to and from the house. And you must be able to traverse the house, including getting to a bathroom with ADA standards.
Do the bathrooms have to abide by the same
No. They don't. They're not making them be like a commercial ADA bathroom.
Right.
But they have to be made so that somebody in a wheelchair can get into a bathroom.
Okay. So that triggers too, the pricing point is probably hard for them to enforce. But if you have to pull a permit,
right?
If you have to pull a building permit, which in Christiansburg and Blacksburg, most things that you do, they're going to make you to most likely pull it.
If you're getting in anything that involves structural work, heating, heating and cooling, plumbing, structural work, power, electrical issues, you're going to end up having to pull a permit. And that's where that review, when you're going to do a permit, you have to give them a plan, you have to tell them what you're doing, and you have to give them the estimate amount of cost. And some jurisdictions don't pay a lick attention to that, and some jurisdictions do. I'm not going to tell you which jurisdictions don't pay it, but you can probably figure it out. If you're thinking about it, you can probably tell the ones that are more scrutinize those things than others do.
Right.
Some places, Giles, for instance, they want people to come and live, so they're less restrictive. They're more flexible because they're encouraging growth and need growth.
Right.
Blacksburg is going to be a different story. Blacksburg is going to hold you to the letter of the law on everything they can.
So
yeah.
If you are going in there and you're taking out cabinets and stuff like that in the kitchen,
That would not trigger. So that's a great question. This case, we used to have this on the board. So with the board of contractors, we would get disciplinary cases all the time, and a lot of them would involve a licensed contractor is not permitted to use an unlicensed subcontractor. So if I'm a licensed general contractor and Cody just messes around with plumbing on the weekends, I can't hire him to do plumbing work. He has to be licensed for me to be able to hire him. Okay. A lot of times what would happen is a GC would start doing a project like a kitchen. They're remodeling a kitchen, but they moved a couple outlets. They changed an outlet from a standard to a ground fault interrupting circuit. They ran a water line to an ice maker for the refrigerator, new refrigerator. All those things require a licensed plumber or electrician to do. And once you get into the point where you change any aspect of the electrical or plumbing, you cease to be just changing out like for like, which doesn't require a building permit, to now you have to get a permit for those portions of the work that require it, electrical and plumbing. Okay.
One more question.
Yeah.
You walk into the house, the floor is slanted, you go under the house, and there's bricks holding up a hoist, and the guy that's selling you the house says, oh, that's just something they left behind. They put these jacks in here. So do these jacks have to go to rock? Do I need a permit? Do I need a structural engineer?
To be safe, sure. Absolutely. To be safe and not sorry, absolutely. I can look at it and tell you generally. I mean, if I look at it and I'm sure, I'll say, yeah, this is a problem. If I look at it, I'm like, and I'm not sure, I'm like, well, we probably need to get a structural engineer to look at it. I mean, I'm not gonna guess at it if I know for sure. So here, this happens. This is frequent in all sorts of structures. Okay, an older property is going to settle some. Okay, and a lot of times the foundations were solid, but some of the piers and stuff were just done with stacked rock or stacked brick. And over time, sometimes people come in and like, I'll put a post up. What does the post connect to? The proper way to do it is to dig a pier, pour a concrete footer, put the correct size post in it, tighten it up to make sure. It's not overly expensive to do. This is one thing that always cracks me up, is I've gone to people's properties where they've rehabbed it. And they've spent a lot of money on cabinets and flooring, and they've painted it. And you walk in and you're like, because the floors are like this. And it's a crawl space. And I'm like, for $1,000, you could have put in 3 concrete piers, and you could have taken pump jacks, and over a week, you pump those jacks up, and it lifts the house into the correct place, and then you set the new post in it, and you could have leveled those floors, and it would have cost you $1,000. You spent $30,000 on improvements, but when you walked, you look like you just come from Sharky's or something. And so a lot of time, and so that's one other thing I will tell you. I guess this is sort of an aside, is sometimes there are improvements that you can do to make a structure a lot better, and they don't cost that much. But people don't think about it because they think it's going to be really hard or it's going to be really problematic. Sometimes it's easy. The house that we did in Pulaski for the investment group in Pulaski, this is a great example. We looked at a house for some folks that are friends, and they were buying this house out of foreclosure. And they asked me to come look at it. And they're like, we flip some houses sometimes in Pulaski, but this is a little bit more involved than we want to do. And the first thing I said to him is, what do you, if you could do everything you wanted to this property, what do you think the market you could sell it for? And they're like, $275,000. We think we could get $275,000. Okay. What are you getting the house for? We're buying it out of foreclosure for $40,000. So we did some math, and I say, so as long as your improvements are under this number, you're going to make the return that you wanted. And they're like, that's right. And I said, okay, that's going to steer me in the improvements that I'm suggesting that you make. So I walked through the house and I said, these first 4 floors are all like, they're all up and down. I'm like, we need to put pump jacks in the crawl space and then put piers in and post. It's going to probably, to do 5 or 6 of them, it's going to cost $2,000. But it's going to level these floors. We'll do it slowly so it doesn't break the trim as the floors raise. Okay. The other thing, I was like, this house only has 1 bathroom. I was like, I think adding another full bathroom, moderate bathroom, fiberglass tub shower, or it's actually a fiberglass shower only, just a basic toilet and a basic, small vanity. I think this was 3 or 4 years ago. Mm-hmm. I said, I think you're probably looking at about $6,000 or $7,000 to do that. I said, but it changes the whole dynamic of what this house can do, because now it has a bathroom on the first floor.
And that's running plumbing.
Right.
Yeah, all that stuff too. Right?
And all of it was easy to do because there was a crawl space underneath it. So that made it less expensive because we didn't have to tear stuff out. We could just go through the floor. So we added that. And then, we made a few more suggestions. We ended up doing some pretty cool tile work in the kitchen and some things. And we finished it and they put it on the market. And it went 2 or 3 months with no option on it. So I would ask, hey, because they paid us separately to do the project. And I'd say, oh, what's going on at the house? You get any lookers? No. And then it never occurred to me to ask, what did you list this property?
Right.
So one day I'm like, I just don't understand it. I mean, we did all the math on this. I mean, I don't understand why you're not getting any looks at this thing. What'd you list it at? 330? So you're trying to make a 40% rate of return. Yeah, I mean, the market is not going to support it. And as soon as they lowered it down to 275, they sold it in a week.
Nope.
And so that was a great project. We as a GC made our normal margin. The experience that we brought to the project helped them because we designed the spaces. We changed some of the room configurations. We cut a hole in the wall so that an area that used to be a bedroom actually became the living room, and it was connected to the kitchen because we cut a doorway into it, and we turned what used to be a sort of a very small living room into a bedroom. And so we changed it around. We redesigned it with our staff, made suggestions, understanding what their budget was and knowing where they were trying to get as a target sales price, and left them some space that even at 275 they could have come down some to move the property. And I was shocked initially when they said it wasn't sold because it was also it was a big market at the time. And then I finally asked Luke, and I was like, what did you guys list at? And I was like, that's like $40,000 more than what you guys said. He's like, we thought we'd throw it out there. I was like, well, 3 months without an offer, buddy. So how long are you guys going to hold it? He's like, we're going to put the price back down.
Well, and that comes back to your, when you're trying to rehab for profits, it's like, that's 3 months of holding costs that you have that are eating into your profits. So like, instead of being greedy and trying to get, $40,000 more dollars, it's better to get your money and go do another project.
So, I'm sorry, what?
How much was that?
I think our contract, they paid, I think we were right at 170,000. So they had like 210 in it, and then they had real estate commission they paid to the realtor, because you got to pay those guys, right? They charge. It's like two or three blocks off of downtown. I mean, 7th Avenue.
Yeah, I think
don't
it was
remember.
right.
147th
near
Avenue?
Steve's house.
Yeah.
Does Pulaski have some weird laws?
No, they don't have any laws.
Pulaski is an interesting case because I would say to you, if you're looking for properties to flip, Pulaski is probably prime for it, right? The only problem is that there's not as much population in Pulaski, and it's slowly going back. But if I had to pick a place where you're likely to get the best opportunities for bigger returns on properties, I would say Pulaski. Yeah. Because it's the markets in Christiansburg and Blacksburg are very, very tight.
When you can buy so much, I don't want to say cheaper, but so much more reasonable that it makes sense. And that was actually a point I was going to make just from the realtor standpoint and the market standpoint on just flipping houses right now. Our motto since we kind of started has been buy, rehab, rent. And you increase your margin there, but you're not pulling any cash out. And that worked really well when rates were really low, because you could make a really decent margin on your rent. Right. Yeah. But now that rates have gone up, surprisingly enough, we haven't caught up with demand still on the building side. The demand for housing is still super high, but with rates being up, nobody's moving. So the inventory is really low. So right now, it really does lend itself well to like the flipping environment, because if you can do your research, you can purchase right, you can make sure that your numbers are going to be solid and get as close as possible. There really is still a lot of demand for housing right now, so you can command a premium and still make a pretty good spread on things. So,
yeah. Anybody else have any questions? Well, thank you. I've come a time or two to listen, and I appreciate what you guys are trying to do. It's 10 years ago, flipping houses was great, and then HGTV came along, and everybody thinks they can do it. And I will tell you this. I'll finish with this. I'm remodeling a condo that my mom and dad bought, and we're making it accessible. It's a 55 and older community. My dad has some mobility issues now. He's in his 80s. And so the unit they bought was actually well constructed 30 years ago. I had a big crawl space, so we could make a lot of changes without having to, because we could go from underneath. It was really quite easy to make this change. So I wanted to, more than likely, this is my parents' last house, and I wanted to do some nice things for it. And so I redesigned it, and it never fails. My mom, who loves HGTV, like the entire time we've been remodeling this thing over the last 4 months, will call me and be like, why is the tile taking so long to finish? And I'm like, well, Mom, it's the tile in this section was done, but then they got to add the things to this, and the cabinets to go, and then the backsplash get done, the process. Well, I don't understand. It just looks so easy when they do it. I'm like, yeah, I'm sure it looks easy when they do it on TV. They don't film, they film it, and it's they don't.
There's only one person there working doing the whole thing.
One person there, and and then she tells me that she's like, I was watching this thing on HGTV, and all the rage and these styles are this, and I'm like, well, Mom, this show is made in California. Okay, so that is kind of the rage and the thing in California. It's like, you live in a 55 and older community where all the units are basically the same. It's like, I don't think you want to do that and then all of a sudden, be out of your ability to resell it. And then my mom says, what do I care? She's like, it's you and your brother to worry about.
Good point.
So I was like, well, okay, Mom.
Go ahead and put the infinity
appreciate
pool
that.
in.
So,
Good deal. Well, we appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
I guess the last thing I'll say is, Jamie knows more than obviously. Things that he does for us that is really helpful is, like he was talking about, the design portion of it too. So, it's good to get your estimates and everything like that. But another benefit of having a GC or, someone like Jamie in general is he can help you walk through it and say, look, structurally, we're able to open this wall up.
That's true.
Let's make a doorway here and make that a second living room. We can move a bathroom over here, and it's only going to cost you X amount. So there is a lot of value to that as well. Not just from a, hey, what's it going to cost to do this bathroom, but what can we fit into this space?
Let me add on one thing about that. What is one thing that drives your listing? Is bedrooms, right? Mm-hmm. What are we required to have for a bedroom? We have to have an egress window or door to the outside, and we have to have a closet. You have those two things, it's considered a bedroom. The more bedrooms you have in a structure, the more you can either rent it or you can sell it, unless you're dealing with some septic restrictions, when that's a whole different ballgame. But a lot of times when you're looking through properties, you might be able to say, you know what? If I take out this formal dining room that nobody uses anymore, and I put a closet into it and cut a doorway in, now I have a bedroom, and now all of a sudden I've significantly changed the dynamics of what this house can be, and automatically you've got a 3-bedroom and you're sitting beside a 2-bedroom, and that house is worth more money. And you maybe spent peanuts to make that happen. Yep. So that's a really great
somebody experienced that knows that stuff. I mean, we went into a house once where the upstairs was only a half bath, and all the bedrooms were upstairs, but the downstairs bedroom had a bathtub and a shower, and it was like, you just think through that stuff. Like clearly living in this, I have to go downstairs. We're all still sharing the same bathroom, even though it's a, there's one right outside. And we were able to look at it and say, well, there's a walk-in closet on the back side of this bathroom. Why don't we just drop it down to a normal closet, but be able to add space for a bathtub and a shower, and something like that, like costs you, maybe $3,000, maybe not even, and drastically increases the likelihood.
Completely changes the dynamics of the usability of the house.
So that stuff, if you're just getting into it, that's stuff to piggyback somebody for, to be able to really maximize the process. But again, appreciate it, Jamie. Thank you guys for coming out. We are going to put this on YouTube. We'll share it out via email. If you guys want to rewatch it or send it to clients or family members or whatever. From here, we can mix and mingle here, but we're going to probably most of us shuffle next door, get a couple beers at Iron Tree and talk deals, just talk real estate and life in general. So hopefully see you next month. We're going to, I think, do it here again. Start doing it. It's nice being able to speak and hear each other and everything like that. So thanks.